Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, sunshine. Good morning, Holly. Good morning. You look so cute today.
Oh, thank you. I didn't wash my hair. That's why it's up.
Oh, well, I did, but I didn't dry it. Is that a shocker? That's all right. Good morning. I'm just checking to see if I'm waiting on anybody else. Today is a good one. There's Candace. Good. Holly said she was excited about this one, so I worked extra hard on this one, just for her. This one is really important because this is where everything can fall apart. This is where things go sideways quickly. Um, really, everyone thinks getting the house under contract is the hard part, but honestly, that's the easy part compared to all of this. And when we talk about all the things that could go wrong, you're going to understand why I say this is the hardest part. There's a lot of moving parts, and the hard part about this part of the process is that all of it is out of our control. A lot of it is out of our control, right? We're relying on other people to do their job. We're relying on the lender to approve their loan. We're relying on the title people to do their title search. We're relying on inspectors to do their job and not scare our clients. We're relying on people to get insurance. Like there's so much that could go wrong in this phase. And most of which is not even our responsibility. We are just orchestrating and making sure that all the things happen when they're supposed to. So I will tell you that, in my opinion, the contract to close phase is the hardest and the most stressful because so much could go wrong and so much could happen along the way. I'm going to tell you that there's things that I do that other agents don't do, that I have been training agents for years to do contract to close the way that I'm recommending you guys do. And I get emails and calls from title companies saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please keep training people to do it this way because it makes their job a lot easier. So I'm going to encourage you, if a title company is calling me, asking me to please keep teaching people to do this, I'm going to tell you that it's helpful. I'm going to tell you that it solves a lot of problems on the back end if you do some of the things the way that I'm going to teach you today. You guys know that I'm very checklist oriented, systems and processes. So I follow a checklist just about for everything. I'm going to share my checklists with you. I'm going to give them to you. Um, and I would highly recommend you use them. Some of them, if you're watching this on a replay, some of them may not apply for you. Like maybe you don't use paperless pipeline, maybe you don't use, dot loop, whatever that is. You can take those things out of the checklist and plug in whatever system you use. But let's get started. I'm going to give you the links in the chat to your goodies. Um, those are going to be there. And I am going to share my screen. We're going to start with outline. How are we all doing today?
Good.
All
Doing
right.
good.
All right.
Great.
Y'all don't talk all at once, Everybody's great. Good. um, let me know when you can see my outline. Is that all good? Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I talked about the importance of contract to close. I'm going to tell you right now, you have a very large responsibility in the contract to close phase. There are a lot of timelines contractually that you're required to follow. There are a lot of moving parts that somebody needs to orchestrate so that everything falls into place without a lot of hitches. The first question I get asked a lot is, do I hire someone or do I do it myself? Raise your hand if you have that question. Should I hire someone to do this, or should I do it myself? Anybody? No? Okay. Well, I will answer it for you anyway, because I know there's people that always struggle with that question. The reality is, for me, I teach people that if you don't know how to do it yourself, you shouldn't hire somebody. So I always want you to learn to do it yourself. And then if you get busy enough that you need to hire someone to do your contract to closer, that's an item that you choose to leverage by hiring someone to do it. That's your choice. But at least then you will know how to hire someone and what to expect them to do. Okay. I lost Bonnie already. So the other thing is that, contract to close can cost anywhere from $350 to like $495 a file. So you have to think about your overhead and whether or not that's something you want to spend. Do I want to spend $350 or $400 to have it done for me? A lot of agents are skeptical about turning this over to a contract to close person because they're control freaks. And I know Holly's on the phone, but she would be the first to tell you, I'm a control freak. I don't like to turn it over to other people. I want to know what's happening in my files. I have done both ways. I've done it myself. I've hired people, and I would just tell you that if it's done right, you still can be in control of the file. The person is copying you on every communication that goes out the door, and you have the ability to follow along with what they're doing and then check in with your client and say, hey, I saw so and so sent you a copy of the contract. Do you have any questions about the timeline? There's a way that you can be very involved, even if you're hiring someone else to do it. So don't let that be a hindrance for you if you're thinking of leveraging. For me, it's more about expenses. Do I want to pay someone to do something that for me only takes me about 10 to 15 hours total? So I don't know if I want to pay for that. It's just going to be up to you and your business. But I will tell you that you should not hire someone to do something unless you really know how to do it or you have an understanding of what the process is so that you can stay on top of it. So my first step, no matter what, is to review the contract and gather information. And you think this is pretty simple because you wrote it if you're representing the buyer, but guess what? You may have forgotten how many days you put for the inspection or how many days of resolution or where the earnest money is going and who's using which title company. And so I'm always going to review the contract and gather all the information that I need. And then I do two things. So I'm going to go back here to my folder that I shared with you guys. And I have a couple things. So one is I create what's called a checklist. This is for when I represented a seller, but you will just need example. It's a simple Google Doc that I go through the contract and I gather all the information and I give this to the title company when I'm sending over a contract. Let me tell you why. The title companies don't read your contract. I know it's going to shock you. It's going to surprise you. But how many times have you gotten all the way through a transaction and the title company has been asking you, oh, you got your settlement statement, all of a sudden you don't have the closing costs on there or your admin fee or all kinds of things don't appear on there and you have to correct it after the fact. So I have always found in my career that if I provide a closing cover sheet that has all the data that this title person is going to need, and I have bullet points at the bottom that are basically the summary of the contract, then it's going to show you, it's going to tell them everything they need to know without having to read the contract. It also has all the contact information for both parties. It has who they're represented by. It has who the lender is. It has the other title company. And this happens to be for a seller, but it's the same for a buyer. I just change out the seller and put buyer and give the information. So I give you a copy of this in the folder. You guys have access to it. I'm just teaching you my process. So basically what this does is cut down on a lot of the mistakes that are made by the title company. I promise you, because they don't read your contract. I don't care who they are. I don't care how amazing they are. They don't read it. So this helps a lot. And this is why I get calls from title companies saying, please keep training people to do this because it helps us and makes our job easier. Here's the other thing. If you have a title company that's using Qualia, like Momentum Title in our office does, you're always going to get these requests. Can you confirm your client's information or can you confirm contact information? Can you confirm commission? You don't have to do all that if you give them a cover sheet, okay? Some of them may still assign you tasks, but if you've given them this, you've already done your part. You don't have to keep doing that. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So there's the one thing is a cover sheet. The second thing I use is called a closing sheet. And this is basically a checklist from start to finish of all the things that you're going to want to notate. When I go through the purchase and sale agreement, I keep this one sheet. So imagine in a perfect world, like a white picket fence world, that you guys are killing it and you've got 6 deals going on at the same time, right? Who would like to have that problem? 6 deals at the same time, like we would all like to have, right? So
Yes,
if you had
please.
6 deals going on at the same time, you're not going to remember all the details of every file. right? And a lot of our stuff is electronic, right? So I usually do this one sheet, and then I have a little binder that has all these sheets in it, and then I don't have to carry around everything. I've got everything accessible to me on one page. It has contact information, the closing date, and everything that I need. So if you can imagine, when I had an office of 72 agents, my closing coordinator, my contract to close person, we had one of these on every file. And so if there was a problem on the file as a broker, I could just open up my binder and grab the sheet, and I knew what the closing date was. I knew all this information. Or if you're writing amendments or addendums, you can look very quickly, what was the binding date? If Dotloop didn't populate that automatically for you, you don't have to go back and look at your contract. It's gathered off of the purchase and sale agreement. It also has little check boxes. Did I get the utility information? Did I email the contract to the buyers? Did I send it to the lender? Did I send it to the title company? Did I send it to the pipeline? Obviously, you can make your own checklist like this based on the systems that you use, but this is how I stay organized. If you have any questions when you're going through this and you don't understand what any of my abbreviations are, just send me a text or email me. I'll be happy to tell you what they are. But typically, LA is going to be a listing agent, BA is a buyer's agent, C is going to be the client, BAD is the binding agreement date. So if you have any other questions, just let me know. But pretty typical, I follow this checklist on every single file that I have. It keeps me organized, allows me to keep everything in one place, and allows me to just follow along in the process. Okay. I do have one other goodie in here for you before I go back to my agenda for today, is I actually have a process and a guide for you that I wrote for my contract to close person. And so some of this, again, is not going to apply if you don't have paperless pipeline or something like that, but basically you can figure it out. Bottom line is I've given you basically all the steps that I use. And number 5 is one of the most important steps that I think you have as a contract to close person. There are 5 dates that should go on your calendar, no matter who you represent, whether it's a buyer or a seller. And those 5 dates are going to be: when does the buyer have to make loan application by? When is their earnest money due? When is the due diligence deadline? So when is the end of their inspection period? When does that end? When is the final walkthrough? What date does the CD have to be out by? So I'm going to ask you guys a question real quick. According to TRID, how many days in advance of closing does a buyer have to sign a CD? 3 days. That's correct. So 3 days before closing, you should have a CD deadline on your calendar, and you're following up with that lender to verify that the CD has gone out and that the buyer has signed it. And then your closing date should be on your calendar as well. Right? So all 5 dates, no matter how many deals I have going at one time, are on my calendar. And I simply put, either the address or the buyer's name or whatever, and I'll put EMD due or due diligence deadline, so that I don't have to constantly keep looking in my file. I can look at my calendar when those things happen. You guys can go through my process and guide, but basically I've gone through step by step and told you kind of what I train these people to do, which is to send an introduction email. That's if you're hiring a contract to close person. Keep this if you ever want to hire somebody to do it. But basically I've walked through and given you notes about each step of the way. And I would encourage you guys to read back through these and see if there's anything that makes, that you have questions about, or things that you don't realize that you should be doing during the contract close process. So you should be setting realistic expectations with your client. So based on the purchase and sale agreement, you want to remind them everything that's in paragraph 1, especially if you represent a seller, not a buyer. Remember, your seller, Candace just had this happen on a closing she had, where the seller took the refrigerator and the microwave, and those things were included not only in paragraph 1, but included in that line 23, where it says what items should be included in the purchase and sale. And they took those items anyway. So setting clear expectations with the client is really important. You want to remind whoever you're representing that these items are expected to be left behind with the property. You also want to set realistic expectations if there's a home sale contingency. Cindy and I are dealing with one right now on a property that our seller accepted a home sale contingency, It's been 1 week since the house has been on the market and our seller is freaking out. Why hasn't it sold yet? Well, the average days on the market is still 30 some days. So they have unrealistic expectations about how fast they're expecting that house to sell. And those are things that you want to talk about on the front end with your clients in the very beginning when they go under contract. Now, keep in mind days on the market, keep in mind market conditions, keep in mind high interest rates, whatever that is, but you want to set realistic expectations. This is also extremely important when you represent the seller. You want to talk to them about the home inspection. You want to talk to them about what we're going to do when we get the inspection back. Hey, when we get this inspection back, remember, we're going to stay focused on what I call the Fab Five. That's going to be your roof, your structure, your plumbing and electrical, your HVAC and safety. And if it doesn't fit in one of those 5 categories, it is typically cosmetic. As the seller's agent, we're not going to worry about things that are cosmetic. And we're also not going to worry about things that don't typically fit in the Fab Five, right? But you want to set expectations with your client, no matter who you represent, so that they know what to expect when the time comes. The biggest piece of advice to you is most of what I do is taking a proactive approach, not a reactive approach. Most agents are very reactive. They wait for that inspection to come and then talk to their clients about what came up on it, right? They wait for the appraisal to come back and then talk about what happens if it's low. They wait for the lender to say there's a problem with the loan and then talk about what if, right? We need to talk about realistic expectations and be as proactive as we can, because most of this is not within our control, right? So if it's not in our control, I want to set expectations so that they understand my job is to orchestrate all the moving parts, but I'm not actually in charge of all those moving parts, right? Letting them know what you are responsible for and then being proactive is going to help save your butt in the end, I promise. You definitely need to prioritize your activities per the deadlines that are on the contract. So obviously, if your formal loan approval or loan application is the first deadline you have, because that typically is, because how many days in Tennessee does the buyer have to make formal loan application? We're playing PSA trivia. Not 5. How many days in Tennessee does a buyer have to make formal loan application?
3.
3 days. That's right. 3 days. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Cindy. I was saying thanks to Holly because she was like 3, 5. She's holding up all the fingers. So 3 days. Yes, they have 3 days to make formal loan application. Most of your buyers have made formal loan application before you went under contract, but some of them have not. So if that's your first deadline, that's your first activity, is to verify with the lender, has this client made formal loan application? Now I'm going to ask you another question. If they have done so, what is your obligation as an agent? Where is your paper trail to prove to the listing agent that that has been done? What are you going to use?
Notification form.
Notification form. You should be using a notification form a minimum of 2 times during this transaction and likely 3. Okay. And we're going to talk about the notification form in a minute and I will tell you why. First one would be, yes, my client has made formal loan application. Here is their lender's information. And that's the first box that you would fill out on the notification form, right? That's the first step. Then your second one typically is going to be, what's the next deadline you typically have in your contract? For most people, it's probably your earnest money, right? Like your earnest money is usually due in 5 days or 7 days, right? So basically, you just want to verify that the earnest money was received or the earnest money was dropped off. I'm going to say again, for everyone's sake, do not provide wiring instructions directly to your client from you. Have your clients reach out to the title companies or attorneys and get the wiring instructions themselves. You do not want to be responsible for being hacked and someone losing their money. Have the title companies send them. Most of them will send them in a secure email that is encrypted And then you also want to encourage your clients to call the title company and verify any wiring instructions they receive over the phone. A lot of them will leave off an account number, leave off a number so that you have to call to verify, which is smart. But guess how many dummies don't call because they don't use their phone for that? They don't like to use their phone. So then they don't have a full account number and their money's sitting out in La La Land, right? So just let your client know, I want you to confirm these details with the title company and you will not be the source of the wiring instructions, okay? So your earnest money is due. You want to verify that it's been dropped off. You want to verify that it's been received. I want you to understand, what does the contract say about earnest money? It says that it must be received by, not dropped, not mailed, right? So you want to make sure that the title company or attorney or whoever's holding it is actually receiving the money that day on the date that you put on there. So again, that date is on my calendar. EM due, like earnest money is due on that day. The next deadline you typically have after your earnest money would be what? Usually going to be your inspection, right? Because a lot of you are going to write inspection within 7 days or 10 days, something like that, right? So the only time you would use a notification form during the inspection period is to let them know you've done your inspection and you accept the property as is, or you've done your inspection and the buyer has decided to terminate. There's a box on the notification form that gives that information, right? That says that you're either accepting it as is or you're terminating, right? Then you have 2 more dates or deadlines on your contract. How many days do you have to order the appraisal? 14, right? How many days do you have to secure hazard insurance?
14.
14. So those are going to be your next dates or deadlines that you might need to put on your calendar. I don't normally need to put the insurance deadline on my calendar because I know it's 14 days. But if it is something you want to be proactive and check and make sure, hey, these buyers have secured insurance. There is also a place on the notification form. This is when you would have used it a second time. The notification form makes you say, I have ordered hazard and I have secured hazard insurance, and here is my insurance company's name. And I have ordered the appraisal through my lender, and my lender has verified that I have enough funds to close. That is a really important part of the contract that people skip over. And I have had buyers who were waiting on their last paycheck in order to pay their closing costs or in order to be able to close. And that's not what the contract says. The contract says the lender has to verify on day 14 that you have enough money to close. So you should have already had that money in your account. You just need to be aware of what those deadlines are. And then obviously you want to schedule any of you've prioritized your activities. You've made sure that you are checking your deadlines. All of those are in your calendar. You want to schedule all of your inspections. You want to ask your buyer too. I don't make comments like, oh, I don't think you need a septic inspection, or I don't think you need a radon test. Don't do that. You're going to get yourself sued. So your job is to offer them all the different types of inspections that exist and let them choose for themselves which ones they want. So here comes another question that people ask me. Do you go ahead and schedule the inspections for your buyer, or do you let them do it? Of course I'm going to schedule them for my buyer. That's my value. That's my responsibility to assist them. Now I have some clients. I have one client right now who is best friends with a home inspector. So he wanted to schedule his own. Totally fine with me. I don't care. But in the absence of that kind of relationship, I'm going to take control of the transaction. My client doesn't know inspectors typically. They're going to rely on me to choose people that I've vetted, that I know are going to do a good job, who are going to make my buyer aware but not scare them, and who are going to find things that are important, right? And so I want to make sure that I am involved in that and I'm scheduling. So one of the questions I ask my clients on the front is, are you going to want to be present through the whole inspection, or are you comfortable coming at the end and letting him go over the report with you? Because a lot of inspectors don't want your client following them around. Some inspectors will bring an extra jumpsuit for them to crawl around in the crawl space with them, and they don't mind. But there's plenty of inspectors that just say, hey, I'd rather your client come at the end so that I can go over the report. I can do my job without them following me around room to room. But you need to set expectations for your client. And if you're proactive, you would say, hey, the inspection's going to be from 1 to 3 on this date. How about we show up at around 2 o'clock? We can take measurements or pictures or whatever, and then be there at the end of the inspection and go over the report. What client is going to argue with you if that's how you present it? Most of them are not. Right? You may have the one that's nervous Nelly that wants to be there for the whole time. That's their choice. But if I present it that way, most of them are going to say, okay, I'll see you there too. Remember, do you notice that I said, let's go at 2 so we can take measurements or pictures or whatever you want? The reason I'm using that language is because if you don't, your buyer is going to want to make 12 appointments to get back into the house to make measurements or to have a contractor come or to, have a designer come or whatever. And that becomes very frustrating to the seller. The seller does not want to accommodate 15 trips to the house. I know the buyer's excited. So you want to be proactive in saying, come on the inspection day. Let's take all our pictures. Let's take our measurements. Then anybody that we need to come to the house, like a contractor or a painter or designer or whoever, they should be coming during the due diligence period. And you should try to limit the visits to the house as much as you can to not upset the seller. But you're always going to have one that wants to come bring Aunt Linda or Grandma Sue or my dad to come look after the inspection or whatever. Right? And I'll talk about that later. Obviously, you've done your types of due diligence you guys can do. Obviously, you have your home inspection. You have a radon test. Some people may want a lead-based paint test. If it is a VA loan and it's on a well, you have to do a well test. You may have to have a septic inspection. There may be a pool inspection. There is a termite inspection. What other types of inspections might you have? You might have an HVAC inspection. You may have a separate roof inspection. I had a client who had gotten burned where the plumbing lines from the street coming into the house were old and needed to be replaced. That never came up on on a home inspection. And so he had to have a separate inspection to test the water, to test the piping, the plumbing lines coming from the street into the house, because that could be $12,000, $14,000, $15,000 to get that fixed. So he wanted to know that that was okay before he bought the house. Anything that your buyer needs to have validated or looked at prior to feeling okay with purchasing this house is something that you want to recommend to them. And you should not give your opinion about whether or not they need it or don't need it. Your job is to offer them the different types of inspections that exist and allow them to choose for themselves. Do they want to make that inspection? I have overheard agents tell clients, oh, well, you don't need to do a radon test. That's just an extra $150. Well, that's not your decision to make. That's theirs to make. Okay. So don't do that. Give them the option, let them decide for themselves, get an idea of the prices for the various inspections that are out there, and let your clients know what they cost so that they can decide for themselves how important it is to them. You don't want someone getting cancer and finding out their house has a high radon level and then them being sick and then come to find out you told them they didn't need a radon test. That's not a good way to sleep. So obviously you've done your due diligence, you've got your inspection report. Now it's your responsibility to sit down with your client and review the items on the inspection report and determine which items you're going to ask for repairs for. Okay. Now, this is another school of thought that some brokers and some coaches and trainers are telling people. They're telling agents, you should not be recommending to your client what things to ask for and not, because it opens you up to some type of liability, is what their opinion is. Well, I'm here to tell you, what is your value in this transaction if you're not there to guide them through this process? They've never bought a house before. How do they know what to ask for and what not to ask for? How do they know what kind of fix this is? How do they know if it's serious or not serious? They don't know any of that without your guidance. So my advice is always, again, go back to the Fab Five. The Fab Five is what will tell you that most sellers will need to fix it no matter what it is. If it's part of the Fab Five, any reasonable buyer is likely to ask for that same repair. Right? Or something that comes up on the Fab Five is likely an item that is most expensive to fix or repair. So it's of importance to the buyer. Now, you've decided, you've gone through the inspection report, you've decided with them that you would like the seller to repair 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 on their report. Now, your question is, or what I get asked a lot is, do I use a repair proposal or do I use a repair amendment? Laura Dahl does not waste her time with a repair proposal because I always assume that the seller is going to accept the repairs that I've asked for. And if they don't, they can type up a new amendment. But the proposal is really a form that's not even, it even says on the form, and this is for Tennessee, y'all, for those of you that are going to watch in another state. But the proposal, it even says on there that this is not part of the purchase and sale agreement. It is only used for negotiations. So some agents will write up their list of requests on the proposal and send the proposal back and forth, and then somebody has to type it all over again on an amendment. So I just skip that step. It's not required. It's just a suggested form. And so I just put all my requests on the amendment. One of the things I want to teach you about writing up repair amendments, you need to be very specific in how you write them. They should be very specific about what you want repaired, how you want it repaired, by whom, and what evidence does the buyer need to see. So for example, if I want a piece of wood that is rotten around a door frame fixed, I would write the seller to have the rotten wood around the door frame at garage entry replaced and painted, prepped and painted by a qualified handyman or contractor. And the seller is to provide me a receipt. So what I see on repair proposals or repair amendments is seller to fix rotten wood around the door. Then you show up for the walkthrough and the buyer's pissed because all they did was fill it in with wood putty and slap some paint on it. Well, that's not what my buyer wanted. They wanted the rotten wood pulled out and replaced and prepped and painted to look right. I've also had sellers that have taken the rotten wood out and they've just slapped up some new wood and they've refused to paint it. Remember, you need to be specific in your repair request to make sure it's done to your buyer's satisfaction. And the only way that's going to happen is if you are specific in your repair request on how you want it done and by whom. For example, you have some handy sellers out there, but maybe they're not qualified. Maybe they do work like Curbio. I don't really know. But did I say that out loud? Sorry. Maybe they do some substandard work and, you know, maybe they think they're handier than they are, but it's not done correctly. It's not done properly. It looks like crap. Maybe it doesn't even pass code the way that they did it, right? But I want you to be specific in your requests. So I use a repair amendment. Don't use the proposal form. It's your choice which one you want to do. Again, when you're writing up your repair request, you want to be very specific what you want repaired, how you want it repaired, by whom, and what evidence do you need to demonstrate. Some people just need photographs. Can you please send a picture of the repair? If it's something in the crawl space or something like that, I'm not crawling in the crawl space to verify that it's been done. Send me a picture, right? Or do I just need a receipt from the company? I want to tell you of a story. I had a plumber once in Mount Juliet that this was on a house in Spring Hill, actually, that the plumber claimed that he had repaired this shower and repaired like 3 other leaks in the house. And I actually got the receipt from the listing agent that said it had been repaired, and I called the plumbing company to verify. Some people would have just taken the receipt, passed it on to their buyer, and called it a day. But I just knew this guy was shady. I had a feeling he was shady. I had a feeling in my gut that I knew he was lying. And I called the plumbing company. You know, the plumbing company told me they never actually did work on that house. They just provided the receipt. Admitted it. But they never actually did the work. And I wouldn't have known if I had called to verify. And I'm not saying you need to verify every receipt you get, but I'm just telling you, if you feel something shady, dig a little deeper. And it's in your buyer's best interest to verify that things have actually been done correctly, right? Which is why, too, if your buyer wants to have their inspector come back out and pay a reinspection fee, it's usually $100 or $200 to have them come back. I paid $300 for one. But if that gives your buyer peace of mind to know that things have been done correctly or the repairs that you asked for to be completed have been done, get your guy to come back out and have your buyer pay a reinspection fee if they don't trust the seller has done it properly. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip down for a second down to where it says amendments versus addendums, because you would be surprised how many people don't know the difference between the two. So when would you use an amendment?
We're gonna change the original contract language.
Anytime you are changing, which is what amend means, when you are changing any language from the original purchase and sale agreement, meaning that you asked for the inspection to be in 10 days and you now need it to be 14 days. You need more time for the earnest money. You're changing any of the terms that were originally agreed to. An addendum is where you are adding things to the contract. So we need to add the grandma because she's going to be a co-signer on the loan, or we're adding the fact that the carpets need to be cleaned, something like that. Those are going to be on addendums because they are not part of the original contract. Does everybody understand the difference? I just want to make sure you guys know, because I have seen agents send me over addendums when it should have been an amendment or vice versa. And I want to make sure you're not out there looking dumb. You know which document goes where. Okay. All right. We've negotiated our repairs. Their next step back up at the top is to prepare for your appraisal. If you are the buyer's agent, is there anything you need to do to prepare for the appraisal? If you're the buyer's agent. Holly, what was that out loud? Yes. You're muted, so I didn't hear you, but yes. So yes, it doesn't matter who you represent. So here's the thing I'm gonna say. Most buyer's agents don't do anything when the appraiser is going, because they feel like that's the listing agent's job to substantiate the price. But here's the thing. If the appraisal comes back low, what kind of problem is that going to cause for you? Maybe the buyer and seller won't be able to work out the sales price. Maybe the buyer and the seller, maybe the whole deal will fall apart if the appraisal comes back low. So you have a vested interest in making sure that the appraiser has the information that you want them to have. So again, maybe include a list of the upgrades the listing agent provided to you. If it's in an MLS, you probably don't need to do that because they have access to that. But maybe they want to see the comps that you selected to show your buyer that the house is worth that, right? So you can always help on the appraisal side if you are representing the buyer. If you represent the seller, your job is to protect your client's interest and make sure that the house appraises for the price that both people agreed to, which means you're going to meet the appraiser. You're going to provide them with comps. You're going to provide them with lists of upgrades that have been done. And you're going to make sure that all the questions that they may have needs to be answered. Hi, Erin. Thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Hi there, Sunshine. Monitor financing. So this is a part I have a disclosure that I sometimes get it depends on my client, but I have like a written authorization that allows me to call the lender and ask questions on their behalf to say, and it basically just says, you're giving me permission to speak to your lender to check on the status of your loan. Because I've had clients in the past that got pissy when I called to check with the lender, hey, how is this buyer's loan going? Or what's the holdup? Can you tell me some more information? And they felt like that was private and that I was not privy to that information. Well, if I'm not privy to the status of your loan, how can I help you navigate this transaction? How can I help you navigate when things go wrong? So you may need a disclosure like that your client signs that says, I give you permission to speak to my lender about my file. Maybe you already have a relationship with your lender that you don't necessarily need that, but I have had to pull it out sometimes if I am the seller's rep, that I have to get a buyer to sign that so that I can talk to their lender about their loan. So don't be afraid to ask for that if you need it. I'm happy to email you guys a copy of it if you want one. But you should be monitoring the financing no matter who you represent. If you are the buyer's agent, you need to be checking in on the status of your loan. Check in. Don't wait for your Tuesday morning update calls or your Monday morning update calls. If your client needs to know what's going on, check in with your lender and say, what's the deal? How's their file going? Especially when they get conditions back. How are the conditions going? Are they things that are pretty easy to remedy? Are there things that I can help with? Right? I had a client once that needed a verification of employment. Their last name was Patel and the people who own the company were Patel. And they could not get a verification of employment. But I drove to the buyer's work and got the verification of employment, something they had been waiting on for 2 months. So is there something I can jump in and help with? Is there something I can do? Right? Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But tell me what the holdup is so that I can get involved. If I don't know what the holdup is, I can't help. Right? It took them 2 months for something that I did in 15 minutes. Right? Because they kept sending it through email. And then the person with the same last name, it kept getting flagged by the underwriter. So I had to get an affidavit of who this person was, that they weren't related to the buyer, to the borrower. But jump through whatever hoops you need to, right? Well, girl, I do what I got to get it closed. That's what I'm saying. I'm proactive. I'm not gonna wait. Especially if it's something that can easily be fixed. I'm a problem solver by nature, and that's what I'm gonna do. After you've monitored the financing, and again, just check in with the people and just say, where are we? You do want to check on your title work. I will tell you right now, I don't care who your title company is. They could be the best title company in the state that you live in. They're very unlikely going to call you and tell you, hey, we got title work back and everything's good. It's no news is good news from title companies. But I like to take a proactive approach. I'm going to check in with the title company and say, have you received the title work back? Any issues or any problems? I promise you, you're going to want to know early on that there's a cloud on the title and how it's being resolved well before closing. So you should be checking in to see. Cindy?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when typically should you check on title work? In Texas, they had 20 days to get the title work back.
Yep.
So what do you suggest as a timeline for us to do that?
I usually check in about day 16 or 17 because I find that it's usually they get it back within those first 2 weeks, but sometimes it's a couple days past that. So usually 17, 18 days in Tennessee anyway, I've found that it's usually back by then. In Virginia, it took me a little bit longer. In South Carolina, it was definitely longer because that's the slow country, not the low country. But in Tennessee, I have found definitely 15, 16 days it's usually back by now. That's a good question. But you should just be checking. Hey, has the title work come back? This is just a check in the box. This is one thing that could go wrong that most agents don't bother to check on. And then guess what? It comes down to the week before closing, and all of a sudden they found out there's an error in prison that nobody knew about. Well, guess what? Your closing is going to get delayed. Right? I don't know why I had to pick that example. There's 100 title examples, but I picked the error in prison because that one's my favorite, But you don't want to be surprised by those kinds of things. So just check on the title work. You're going to schedule your final walkthrough in possession. You guys have heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again for the video, is that you should be proactive in saying, we are going to do our final walkthrough on Tuesday at 4 p.m. We are expecting the house to be completely empty and in broom clean condition. And I'm going to be taking the key from the lockbox and holding it until closing. I'm not asking them what time. I'm not asking them about the key. I'm not asking them. I'm reminding them that I want it to be empty for the final walkthrough. You know why? Because everyone likes to know why. If you don't say we're expecting the house to be completely empty and in broom clean condition, they're not required, by the way, to have it in broom clean condition. That's not in the contract, unless you wrote it in the contract. But I'm setting an expectation because I don't want my buyers walking into trashed house with trash everywhere, dirt, and it's gross, and they didn't clean up after themselves. They're not required to do that, but I'm setting the expectation that we would like to see that. The second thing is if you don't tell them that you're expecting everything to be gone, I have shown up to final walkthroughs and not one box has been packed. Nothing's on a truck. Nothing has been loaded. They haven't even scheduled a mover. Do you think you're going to have problems on closing day if you don't address that in the walkthrough? Absolutely. So you want to set expectations with the listing agent that, listen, we're expecting it to be completely empty and in broom clean condition. And I'm going to be taking the key from the lockbox. The rest of the keys and the remote should be inside the kitchen in a drawer. And I will hold on to the key till closing. Notice I'm not asking them, because I'm not driving all over town to pick up the keys. I'm not expecting the title company to hold on to the keys and the remotes. And I'm not waiting for that listing agent to tell me, oh, you can't have the keys until it funds or until my client gets their money. No, I want to be proactive and I want to take control over when I get the key. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, thank you. All right, you're going to schedule closing. Obviously, you guys know how I feel about this. I don't love closings on Mondays or Fridays. I pick Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. Friday closings can be a nightmare if the package doesn't get there in time. If the bank does not wire the funds ahead of time, your client could be sitting without possession of the property throughout the weekend. I also don't like Monday mornings because nobody does anything in advance. You know, the people leave the title company on Fridays at 5 o'clock and nobody's looked at anything for Monday morning's closing. So I just don't love Monday mornings. So I pick a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I also never pick the last day of the month, even though lots of people like to, because they save interest, right? But I like to pick the day before or 2 days before, but I don't like the last day of the month because if something goes wrong and you have to push closing back, there may not be a time slot available because it's the end of the month and everybody else has picked that day. So I'm just giving you the insight into my brain as to why I like Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays and not the last day of the month. You also should always be checking your calendar before you write a contract to make sure that the closing date is a day that is actually not a holiday. Make sure it's not a bank holiday. And I agree with you, Aaron. We don't like 9 a.m. closings first thing in the morning, even though we do, agents do, lenders don't, but we like 9 a.m. closings just because we want to get it funded that day and get our money faster. But it does create a problem for the lenders at 9 a.m.
I will jump in and say,
Go ahead.
CMG will fund day before now, which is vastly different. When I was at guaranteed rate, they're always funding same day. CMG will fund day before, so
Right.
that's usually not an issue here. But a lot of lenders, it's a problem because they're scrambling last minute, you know, to get docs over, and then they've got to postpone closing or back it up. You know, it's just messy.
Yeah, and there are some listing agents out there, I told you, that are like pit bulls on a bone, and they will not give possession until their seller gets their funds. And that's not fair. If the money is at the title company, your person should get possession. And you need to take control and push back on that agent and say, no, my client's done everything they're supposed to do. They've signed all the documents. The lender has funded and the title company has the money. I'm not responsible, nor is my client responsible for when your client gets their money. They should get their possession. But I had a client, a cuckoo client in East Nashville once that refused to actually even sign her deed until she got her money. She said, I'm not signing my deed until I get my money. So she sat in that title company and waited for 6 hours for her money to fund, which they couldn't even do without her signature. So they had to do it simultaneously. It was so stupid. But I'm just telling you, there's some wackadoos out there that make their own rules. You control what you can control. You're going to review the settlement statement. And remember, we talked about the CD has to be signed 3 days in advance of closing. You're checking in on your lender to make sure that's gone out. You're making sure that the buyer has signed it, that there's not going to be a holdup due to that. And then you're going to review the settlement statement. What are you looking for on the settlement statement? You're making sure that the sales price is correct, right? Remember, if you guys reduce the price in negotiations for your inspections, did you tell the title company? Did you send that amendment to the title company? Anything that's related to money, if your seller or buyer is giving or getting closing costs or we're reducing the price, all of that needs to go to the title company because that affects the settlement statement, right? So you're looking for the sales price. You're looking for any credits that were agreed upon. So if your contract said the seller is going to give the buyer $5,000 in closing costs, you're making sure that the $5,000 is reflected on the settlement statement. Who is paying the title insurance? Is that on the being charged to the correct person? You would be surprised, even with my cover sheet and even with the contract saying that the seller is going to pay the title insurance, guess who gets charged it at the closing on the settlement statement sometimes? So I have to check, is it being charged to the right person? Who's paying for a warranty? Is that being charged to the right person? Do you have an admin fee? Is that on the settlement statement? Is your commission correct? So I've had some agents try to tell the settlement attorney that the commission was supposed to be 6%, 3 and 3, and I'm just talking in generalities. And then guess what? That's not what my commission was, right? They don't know what I charged the seller. So you just need to make sure that your commission is reflected correctly. And then just verifying that your client understands what the how much money they're supposed to bring to closing, and make sure that that was the amount that they were expecting, that there's no big surprises. Sorry, honey. Thank you. And you want to make sure that if your seller is expecting a refund, you know, is that amount line up with what you had anticipated them getting back on their net sheet? You just don't want surprises. When you get the settlement statement, you don't want your buyer to think that they're only supposed to bring 12,000 to closing and the settlement statement says they're bringing 25. That would be a bad day, right? And that's the whole thing that TRID is supposed to help with, that closing disclosure, because back in the day, our clients didn't know what they were supposed to bring until literally an hour before closing, which is not fair, right? They need to prepare. And I would have clients running to the bank to go get a cashier's check for the difference because they didn't know that they were supposed to bring that much, whatever. But your lender should do a very good job on the front end, making sure that your client knows exactly how much they should bring. And then the closing disclosure should be in line with that. And there should be no surprises anymore about the amounts differing. So let's talk about what could go wrong in this contract to close phase. There could be financing problems, right? People were not honest about how much they make or how many hours they work. What they said on their initial application doesn't line up with what their verification of employment says, right? They were trying to count alimony or child support or a part-time job they've only had for a month. Whatever it is, there could be financing problems. There could be issues with the inspection. Maybe your buyer decides to terminate, right? Insurance issues. Maybe it's an older home and it still has knob and tube wiring, or there's a storm brewing off the coast and nobody is issuing insurance and you can't get an insurance issued. Maybe there are appraisal issues. The price comes back valued less than what the buyer and the seller agreed to sell it for. You could have title issues, an heir out there that never signed off, or a lien on the property that the seller didn't know about, that now is impacting how much they're walking away from the sale with. There may be some contract contingencies that need to be met in order for the deal to go through. Do you have a home sale? Does the seller have to do something that they are now not willing to do? Are there environmental issues like the septic? Do you have a septic permit? Does the septic, you know, the inspection came back on the septic not good? Or maybe it's a VA loan and it needs a well inspection, water inspection, something like that. There could be death or an illness. So I've had 3 times in my career where a seller involved in a transaction passed away. Well, that could have some serious legal implications to your deal, right? If the seller passes away, what's the next plan? Who is in charge? The heir that's in charge of that. Well, how do you solve that, right? Or during COVID, I had a seller who was hospitalized, unable and on a ventilator, not able to make legal decisions, right? So certain things could impact your sale that you need to be aware of. Missed deadlines are a huge one. As a listing agent, I have seen buyer's agents miss their due diligence period all the time because they don't know how to count how many days. Apparently, when they wrote 10 days, they thought they had 10 days to do their inspections and that they would have 4 days to write up a request. That's not what the contract says in Tennessee. It says that you have 10 days. If you wrote 10 on the blank, then that means you have 10 days to do your inspections and produce a list of repairs. That resolution period is not tacked on to your 10 days. Those are the number of days you have to negotiate. But you should have submitted a repair proposal or you accept the house as is. And I have had buyer's agents come to me on day 11 or 12 on a Monday after the weekend has passed and said, oh, here's our repair request. Well, I'm sorry, you've missed your deadline. And my seller is now not obligated to repair things that you're asking them to. But out of good faith, I will take it to them and ask them, but they're not required to. This is why I tell you, you need to put your dates on your calendar because you are responsible for managing these deadlines. And if you miss the deadline, your client can be impacted. So for example, let's say your client, they have so many days to get the earnest money there. They decide not, you missed the due diligence deadline, and now you're asking for repairs, and the seller says, no, I don't want to do the repairs, and your buyer says, I want my earnest money back. You don't get it back because you missed the due diligence deadline. So that could be $10,000. That could be $25,000. You need to be very cautious about your money situation and your fiduciary responsibility to your client and make sure that you are managing your deadlines appropriately because your client could lose out. And if you have a client, I have some clients that put a lot of money down, their earnest money might be $100,000. That's a lot of money on the line that you need to pay close attention to the deadlines and make sure you're not jeopardizing, right? Doesn't matter if it's $1,000 or $100,000. You have a responsibility to your client to make sure you're not missing deadlines. It's a simple task. Mistakes or miscommunication. This is why you have errors and omissions insurance, right? These things though can cost the whole deal. Miscommunication about what is expected, miscommunication about when things are supposed to be done, or mistakes that you made, you forgot to put on the contract. Maybe you forgot to put that you want the carpets cleaned at the seller's expense. You might have to pay for that, right? One time I wrote that the house had storm windows. This is my very first listing back in 1999. And I put that the house had storm windows and it didn't. So guess who had to pay for a whole house full of storm windows? I did. I didn't even think about asking my errors and omissions insurance to cover it, but I had to buy a whole house full of storm windows. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're not making mistakes if you can, you know. So thanks for being here, Rachel. Buyers or sellers remorse. This happens all the time. A seller decides they don't want to sell. They're too emotionally attached to the property. Or a buyer gets knee deep in and decides to backpedal and they get scared, right? This could happen. Right? Again, it's important to take a temperature of your client and see how they're feeling. Are they scared? Are they nervous? Are they, you know, are they excited? But you need to check in and see how they're doing. Sometimes your buyer's remorse will come out of nowhere and they're already through their inspections or through their appraisal. We're just waiting on closing date. And all of a sudden they decide they don't want to buy anymore. Aaron and I had one like that. There was no reason for it, right? We had no indication that the client was even backpedaling until it was too late. They were already through every step of the process, but it happens. They changed their minds, right? Natural disasters, again, tornado could come through and rip the house up. You have nothing to sell, right? A house could burn down due to an electrical fire. We could have 100-year flood and the house floods. All kinds of things could happen. Best practices for you. I'm going to tell you to use a checklist. I've given you 2 that you could use. Add all the dates on your calendar. Make sure that you are following the dates and staying on top of those. Set reminders for yourself. Develop a proactive approach. Remember, we don't leave things to chance. We take control of the things that we can control. Maintain detailed records. You never know when your butt is going to get hauled into court or when someone's going to try to sue you for something and your involvement in it. Keep a record of who you talked to and when. When did you schedule this? When did you, ask the buyer this? Or when, if they deny or decline certain inspections, have them sign something that says, we don't want a termite. We don't want a radon. We don't want this, so that you have covered your butt to say we offered it to them and they decided not to do it. Keep clients informed regularly, even if there are no updates. This is a big part where clients start to feel like, what's happening? What's going on? You should have a weekly update to your client, even if there's not anything to tell them. You should say, I checked on your loan, everything's progressing, or I went by the house, everything looks good, or I checked in with the title company and everything's moving along smoothly. But no communications, the absence of communications breeds assumption, right? It also breeds, insecurity. And you just want to keep your clients excited and keep them going along with the process. Listen actively to your clients' concerns and address them promptly. Remember, if your client starts to tell you that they're backpedaling and they're concerned, you need to address that early on. You don't want that to fester and turn into a termination. But you also want to listen to them. Are they concerned about the money? Are they concerned they won't have enough down payment? Start to dig a little deeper into why they're fearful, why they're scared, or thinking about terminating. And then the last thing I want to tell you about best practices is to please collaborate with other professionals, your inspectors, your title people, your insurance, your lender. These people are on your team. Do not be the agent that is on a pit bull on a bone that nobody wants to work with. Are you being collaborative or are you being aggressive? Right? So ask yourself, am I somebody that somebody wants to work with, or do I make this whole process more challenging? It's okay to advocate for your client, but you can do so with respect and from a place of collaboration. When problems do arise, maintain your professionalism and composure. Calm yourself down before you fire off a 14-page response to your client, right? Because I promise you, I've written several. And they've just stayed in my notes or stayed in my draft. They never got sent. Ooh, there were flames flying off my keyboard, right? Sometimes at the lender, sometimes at the inspector, sometimes at the client. But keep them in your drafts, right? Sleep on it. There's no good that's going to come at your drunken email at 7 o'clock. I promise you. 3 bottles of wine in. Just hold on to it. Stay calm and composed even in high stress situations. Remember, your client is relying on you to be the professional. They are emotionally charged. They are emotionally driven. And when you start thinking about the loss of your commission and prioritizing that over your client's feelings, you've already lost. When you prioritize how you feel over your client's feelings, you are not acting as a professional. You need to maintain professionalism and composure. And when they get worked up, you need to stay steady. This is why we say we wear the hats. Sometimes we're the therapist, sometimes we're the doctor, sometimes we're the psychiatrist. We're all the people because our clients are expecting us to help them as they're riding the waves of emotions up and down, of nervousness, of being scared, making big decisions they've never made before. They're relying on us to keep them calm and steady. And if you get all rattled, what is your client going to do? They're going to get rattled. If you start throwing the other agent under the bus, as much as you want to, what's going to happen is now your client is going to have a disdain for the other side. And they're going to be harder to negotiate with because they're mad at them too, right? So I made the mistake once that I was really pissed off at this listing agent. And I was very close with my client. And so I felt safe telling my client what this other agent had said and done. And then guess what? When it came time to negotiate, my client did not want to bend at all because they were pissed on my behalf. It was not professional. It was not their business. I should handle my own business with the other agent, not tell my client about it. Be careful what you share with your client about the other agent, okay? Be respectful and courteous in all interactions. Communicate clearly and professionally, both in writing and verbally. Avoid engaging in conflicts or disputes. Involve supervisors or mediators if necessary. And the best piece of advice I can give you is to always seek help from a mentor or your broker early on, especially if a mistake is made. A lot of agents are afraid to admit to people that they made a mistake, and they keep trying to figure a way out on their own until it's too late. Early is best. We can solve it if we know what the problem is. We can help you navigate it if we know what's going on. But if you avoid it or avoid the agent and you don't communicate what's going on, I promise you it's going to get worse. Even if your client is the one that's in the wrong, your client is the one that didn't get the lender information in time or the things that they'd asked for, and that's why the loan is delayed, or your client was dishonest on their loan application. You've got to be forthcoming with the other side so that people can pivot and plan and help problem solve. But if you see that other agent's number come over on your phone and you ignore all the calls and you tell them you're in meetings and you just answer back with text messages, you're not going to be able to effectively solve the problems. And I see it every day. Oh God, I don't want to talk to this lady. She's such a crab. She's such a crab apple, or she yells at me every time I answer the phone, or my client is pissed at me, so I don't want to answer the phone. That's not how you do business. You man up, woman up, whatever you want to call it. You answer the phone and you communicate effectively and you put on your problem solving hat and you get through it. But avoiding it, I promise you, is only going to make it worse. So just to recap, I've given you a cover sheet that you should be using on all your files that you send over to your clients. Let me drop this link back in the chat just for latecomers in case they want it. I've given you a cover sheet that I think you should use on all your files that's going to help you avoid mistakes on the back end. I've given you a contract to close process and guide. This is what I gave to the girl I hired. So I've gone through step by step and told her what to do. You have my outline for today that kind of has best practices. And then I've also given you a closing sheet that allows you to organize your files on one page so that you have all the information available to you and you have boxes you can check off along the way. Anybody have any commentary on anything that I've shared today or any questions that I didn't answer? Was this helpful? Did you get what you paid for?
Very.
All
Yeah.
right. Awesome.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you for being here today. Next week, I think we start on explanation of services. Right? Explanation of services part 1. You're going to have to do some digging next week. And that means we're going to talk about when you go to a party or an event and someone asks you, what do you do? Your answer is not, I'm a realtor. You're going to have a different way of explaining what you do that doesn't make people scatter like cockroaches. Okay? But you're going to have to do some soul searching and some digging about what you do. And you're going to have to get creative about how you explain what you do to people in a very short, succinct way that is impactful and meaningful that gets people's attention. You're going to have to think about things that you believe in regarding your industry. I believe that buyers and sellers, or I believe that borrowers, blah, blah, blah. But you're going to have to think about what your belief statement is. And so we're going to dive into an explanation of services next week. And I'm excited to teach you guys that because it's going to change the way you think about your business, I think. I hope this was super helpful to you. Remember to join me next week at 10 o'clock Central. And if you guys have any questions about contract to close or anything we covered today, you know how to find me. You can send me an email or you can call me or text me and I'll be happy to explain anything that you need on there. Thanks so much for being here and I hope you guys have a great day. Go out and sell some stuff. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.